Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to call to order this regularly scheduled meeting of the Intergovernmental Relations Committee. I'm the committee's chair, Councilmember Andrew Johnson, and I'm joined today by a quorum of our committee members, Councilmember Warsame, Schrader, and our vice chair, Council Vice President Jenkins. We have before us on the agenda two items. First, a consent item, the passage of a resolution opposing war with the Republic of Iran and calling for immediate de-escalation. And then the second item is receiving and filing an update on our federal, state, and local actions. I might actually move we'll see here. I wanted to see if Councilmember, and we are joined today by Councilmember Gordon as well. So we'll go ahead and take up that consent item, that resolution. I will go ahead and move an amended version of it, which is before you. And then I wanted to see if Councilmember Gordon wanted to say anything. I'll note that I'm moving this as the chair, but really it's Councilmember Gordon and his office who've done a ton of work drafting this, bringing this forward.
Well, thank you. I can just speak briefly. This is in response to what's been happening at the federal level, and I think really representing the sentiments of everybody here on the city council who are outraged at the sort of the misuse of presidential authority and acts of aggression, but also I think standing up with the many people throughout our city who are also concerned about this, and also with other elected officials who represent the area of this, who are doing work in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere to try to call for more peaceful relations with everyone.
Excellent, thank you. And then this is a question for our clerk, just procedurally. We have Councilmember Gordon added as the first name on this? Or if he's not on the committee, do we wait until we get to full council on that?
Chair Johnson, the full resolution lists all council members as authors, with Gordon being first. You're just listed as the author of this motion.
Great, excellent. Thank you so much. Perfect. Any comments or questions on that, Vice Chair Jenkins?
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I just want to thank Councilmember Gordon and his staff for bringing forward this this resolution. I'm really happy to support this. We know that in any aggressive acts of war, that the people who are most challenged are really poor and impoverished people, no matter where war happens throughout the world. And we, as a society in 2020, need to be moving towards peaceful resolutions to disputes in our world, and I fully support this resolution.
Thank you. Councilmember Warsame.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would also like to reiterate the points that Council Vice President made, to thank Councilmember Gordon and his staff for the work they've done, and that, we shouldn't be rushing to another war in the Persian Gulf, especially after the disastrous wars we've had in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I think this is a very thorough resolution. It does touch upon the point that we have a sister city relationship with the city in Iraq, a holy city in Iraq, as well as even the point about how much money our taxpayers have paid in the city of Minneapolis to go to these wars. Imagine how much of that money could have gone to address some of the issues we've had in affordable housing and some of the crises we have in our city. So thank you very much for this, and I stand in solidarity with everybody in opposing this war with Iran.
Great, thank you. Any further discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, the motion carries. Now we will go ahead and move on to our discussion item, our federal, state, and local updates with Mr. Ranieri. And I think before we jump into that, we have a couple of new faces on the IGR team who we'd love to have introduced to the committee.
Mr. Chairman, I can have them introduce themselves, or would you like me to do it?
Oh, please come on up. Yeah.
Hello, council members. My name is Dustin Leslie. I work in the Grants and Special Projects part of the Intergovernmental Relations Division. Prior to that, I worked in public safety. I spent 2 years at Hennepin County as a 911 dispatcher. After that, I worked at the Department of Public Safety at the state of Minnesota as a project analyst. So I'm really excited to work for the city of Minneapolis and the community that I live in. And very nice to meet all of you.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kate Dewin. I'm the new legislative aide with IGR for this session. Prior to this, I was getting my master's degree in political science from McGill University in Montreal, Quebec. And before that, I worked in Minneapolis here at Lutheran Social Service in refugee resettlement. So it's really great to be back to work with you all and work on forwarding the city's goals at the legislature.
Excellent. Well, welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for taking a moment to indulge us in introducing yourselves, and we're excited to have you on the team. All right, well, let's dive right into those updates.
Mr. Chairman, this is going to be a little more lengthy than usual because at about 10 o'clock this morning, the governor released his bonding bill. And so Allison Nessie will go through that a little later. Also, there's been some things happening in Washington that we'd like to brief you on, and then go through the bonding bill and several hearings that are going to be occurring, one now in Rochester, and a couple more in the next couple of weeks dealing with things like housing, crime and justice, race and justice, and other issues, especially some energy issues too. So even though the session is not till February 11th, there are 4 or 5 hearings being heard over the next couple of weeks. So we'll go through that with you in a couple as we start.
Excellent.
On the federal update, Chris, quickly, the appropriations bill has been signed by the president, so we do have a budget for this fiscal year. We're not living off a continuing resolution. Most of the funding levels for community development block grant are about the same with a little bit of an increase. Public housing is about the same. Transportation, not very much change. And I added tax extenders because several members of this committee and the council were concerned about some of the tax exemptions or reduced taxes that were scheduled to be terminated in 2020. Many of those were extended. The one that I heard much about was our burgeoning industry in brewing and distillery. The tax would have made it very difficult for small distillers. That's been removed. It's still at the same rate as it was, but it will go back into effect in 2023. So that tax extender stayed. Other tax extenders that have been moved forward for a while are a lot doing with individual income taxes and medical expenses. But the one that people are most concerned about has been preserved, the tax break. In terms of rules, Mr. Bauer from our staff is going to talk about the affirmative fair housing rule that's been proposed by HUD. And then myself and Tamara Down-Schweyer will talk about some of the SNAP rules. Even though SNAP isn't a program we administer, it has a great impact on our city, particularly on nutrition, children, and families. So I'll turn it over to Matt, and then we'll go to Tamara.
Great. Welcome.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, I'm Matt Bauer in the Intergovernmental Relations Department, and Jean's asked me to kind of come up here and kind of summarize the proposed affirmative furthering fair housing rule that HUD issued. It was published yesterday. It was preliminarily released last week, so you might have seen some news coverage of it last week. I'm going to summarize the rule by illustrating some key points and differences it has with the existing rule that was enacted by HUD in 2015, which codified longstanding HUD interpretation and congressional intent in their understanding of congressional intent with the 1968 Fair Housing Act. So it took almost 50 years for HUD to come up with a rule. They issued that rule in 2015 for jurisdictions that receive HUD housing assistance. And with the current administration, HUD administration, they've sought to weaken the rule, and with this proposed rule, basically redefine several key elements of the rule moving forward. The 2015 rule, in summary, asks communities to use a planning approach to identify meaningful actions to overcome historic patterns of residential segregation, promote fair housing choice, and foster inclusive communities free from discrimination. The current administration, as I said, HUD has sought to weaken the tools that communities had available to them to do this analysis and this planning. They postponed the implementation of the rule, and now with this rule, substantially redefine a community's obligation on how they can affirmatively further fair housing in their community as a recipient of federal housing funds. HUD states in the proposed rule that came out yesterday that the existing 2015 rule is too prescriptive of local governments and uses a burdensome planning process for local governments, as well as they note it's a burden for HUD to implement. HUD intends with the new regulation or the revised regulation to promote and provide incentives for innovations in areas of affordable housing supply and access to that affordable housing and improve affordable housing conditions. In the proposed rule, HUD states that they believe that fair housing choice exists when a jurisdiction can foster the broad availability of affordable housing that is decent, safe, and sanitary, and can do so without housing discrimination. You'll notice in that I've talked about affordable housing. So HUD has, with the new rule, basically conflated the issue of affordable housing with fair housing. And I'll define it, go a little further into that here. The rule proposes to achieve that, the provision of affordable housing that's decent, safe, and sanitary by redefining what affirmatively furthering fair housing means and how communities are to certify that they are doing so, and then how communities would then be ranked in their ability to further fair housing under this new framework with data measures determining whether a jurisdiction can show that it's free of adjudicated fair housing claims, has an adequate supply of affordable housing affordable housing throughout its community, and has a adequate supply of quality affordable housing. These last 3 points, free of housing claims, availability of affordable housing, and the quality of that housing, would be used to rank communities in the future by HUD, and high performers would be rewarded with financial assistance or incentives through the federal government, and low performers would allow HUD to re-examine their certification annually that they are affirmatively furthering fair housing, which would lead to sanctions that would lead up to potentially either suspension or recovery of funding. The affirmatively furthering fair housing definition in the current rule is a community taking meaningful actions that, taken together, address significant disparities in housing needs and in access to opportunity, replacing segregated living patterns with truly integrated and balanced living patterns, transforming racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty into areas of opportunity, and fostering and maintaining compliance with civil rights and fair housing law. Under the new rule, this definition is changed to simply be advancing fair housing choice within a program participant's control or influence. So the program participant being the city of Minneapolis. Fair housing choice is defined as allowing individuals and families to have opportunity and options to live where they choose within their means without unlawful discrimination related to the federal protected classes of race, color, religion, sex, family status, or national origin or disability. This fair housing choice would consist of protected choice, meaning absence of discrimination, actual choice, meaning that not only do affordable housing options exist, but that the information and resources are available to inform that choice. And then quality choice, which means that any available affordable housing that is present is decent, safe, and sanitary, and consistent with disabilities, accessible to those with disabilities. The third piece, the third change in the rule is how to certify that you as a community are affirmatively furthering fair housing. Currently, that would be taking these meaningful actions under the current rule to further the goals identified by HUD in that affirmatively furthering fair housing rule. Under the proposed rule, if a community is ranked low in the provision of affordable housing as measured by supply and housing costs, HUD may find it in violation of its certification. We would need to certify that we are producing a decent and available supply of affordable housing, and that it is in good quality condition, and that it is accessible in an open environment. We would be measured upon whether we are following the certification through annual reports that we would make through HUD.
We do have a question or comment, Councilmember Schrader.
No, I have a question that's pretty, I really appreciate the detail, but it is a lot. Just a quick question to come back to housing cost and how we'd be ranked. Is that, am I understanding it right, that cities with higher housing costs, that would be considered a negative?
That would be correct.
Okay, so just any place that has, it's not even regionally, it's just how they would rank nationally.
It would be, yes, Chair Johnson and Councilmember Schrader, it would be within the jurisdiction. So it would be the jurisdiction's affordability of housing within that jurisdiction and the cost of housing within that jurisdiction.
I guess my question is just on the cost of housing. Are we going to be compared with, cities with higher housing cost as well as cities with lower housing cost?
That is a question that HUD has posed in the proposed rule on how they should break that out. It looks like high cost housing areas would be compared with each other, but that's still to be determined how exactly that would be broken out and by size of the housing market as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
And again, us as a community would be ranked with other communities, and it would be on whether we have an adequate supply of affordable housing, and we're working to increase that supply, and then how that, whether that housing is of high quality.
Yeah, Councilmember Schrader.
That just spurned another question. So I guess taken further, if cities would be considered negative if they are not providing enough affordable housing, is the answer, according to this new rule, that they get less funding?
Chair Johnson, Councilmember Schrader, that would be a potential sanction that HUD could take under the new rule. HUD has, in the rule, HUD does produce what they identify as kind of, so under the new rule, when we do a fair housing report or study, we would, for a 5-year period with our consolidated plan, we would identify at least, they're suggesting 3 goals, fair housing goals. It could be, we're going to increase the amount of affordable housing in our community. It could be, we're going to reduce some of the barriers that might be present in allowing us to achieve that increase in affordable housing. Are we doing something in our development processes or our permitting that is preventing that, the market from filling that gap? The HUD has other suggestions, though, and I won't get into them. It's a laundry list of suggestions, but a lot of them are, I'll summarize this. I mean, again, in the new rule, HUD is equating affordable housing as fair housing. It's not asking communities to examine how the legacy of past federal and local government actions in how that housing is sited or where it's sited, what opportunities are made available to its residents to access that housing, whether it be affordable or non-affordable, but in a choice location. We're not asked to examine any of that under the new rule. We're only to analyze what level of affordable housing should we be providing to afford choice to those who need it?
No, thank you.
I think that's a helpful summary and maybe a good place unless there's any additional questions or comments, that might be a good one to leave the public with at this. And then if we have additional details, maybe those could be, a memo or a briefing could be sent out on that.
Yeah. So I'll follow up. We will. The rule just came out yesterday. We're just going to start looking at it. We're going to look at it with the attorney's office. We're going to look at it with housing staff and examine whether we should, as a city, make a comment on the rule. Comments are due through March 16th. We did provide, HUD did issue an advance notice in the fall of 2018 on revising this rule, and the city provided comment on that, and in essence, it stated its affirmation of the 2015 rule and ways we thought it could be augmented in ways that would make it easier for us to administer. But the spirit behind that rule was expressed in those comments, consistent with our federal agenda at the time.
Great. Thank you. We appreciate your attention on this. Councilmember Schrader?
Just, I think that would be fantastic just to know about, whether we should put in a comment. But I think in addition to that, knowing it would be good to have kind of a legal understanding of what that rule will mean for our current funding from the federal government and future funds, and whether we would need to kind of adjust our housing policy to make sure we're able to fund our initiatives.
Great. Thank you.
Ms. Down-Schwei will be brief on the other proposed rules that impact our city and our residents.
Great, thank you. Welcome.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. Tamara Down-Schwei, Food Policy Coordinator in the Sustainability Office, and staff for the Food Council, who is watching proposed cuts to our food safety net very carefully. Pleased to be here to say a few brief words, as Jean said, just to provide an update. When the Farm Bill was proposed, there were several cuts proposed to SNAP, which were not included in that approved Farm Bill, but nevertheless, these cuts continue to be proposed by the federal government now as executive orders. And so what we're dealing with now is, for one, a utility allowance rule proposed change that is going to have an impact on potentially 19% of SNAP households who would get lower SNAP monthly benefits as a result of a reduction in the standard cap of the utility allowance that's included in calculations. Additionally, categorical eligibility is an area of great concern for our state and our city. We have been allowed through that provision to increase the income limit for SNAP from 130% to 165% of the federal poverty level. And also, as a result of the current proposal, if that shifted, children would no longer have this kind of automatic qualification for free school meals that they currently have. So the kind of the percentage that we would have the ability to kind of have flexibility on would be potentially affected, as well as children who would in our schools. Currently, the number in Minneapolis public schools eligible for free and reduced price lunch, nearly 35,000 students are currently eligible. We're still looking at what percentage of those students would be affected, but thousands of Minnesotans and Minneapolitans could be affected by both of these proposals, as well as the public charge rule, which would really pose concern for people applying for their immigration status and how that would be calculated. So these three areas, as well as the requirements for able-bodied adults without dependents, have all been proposed in a way that would affect thousands of our residents potentially.
Well, we appreciate the update and look forward to hearing more.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to turn it over to Allison to talk about the governor's bonding proposal. We do have some detail here. We will be getting more to you because we just received it this morning. We will go in more detail and get a memo to the entire City Council and Mayor's office within the next 48 hours.
Great, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Allison Nessie, Government Relations Representative. Chair Johnson, committee members. As Jean has stated, the bonding bill from the governor was released this morning at 10 a.m. As you've probably seen in the news over the past week, he's been releasing snippets under different categories of kind of buckets, they were calling it. The first one released was the housing, which he's put $275 million towards housing. On Friday, he unveiled his water infrastructure package, and the city had the opportunity to then host the governor down in one of the 10th Avenue stormwater tunnel over on East Hennepin.
Which I'm going to stop you for a second and just say what a remarkable job staff did, you did, Public Works did on accommodating that tour on short notice and really making sure that we were set up for a successful tour of, frankly, an enclosed space that has a lot of rules and restrictions around it, and trying to make all of that work. And it was just really well done, and we appreciate all the work that went into that.
Thank you. I did want to acknowledge our surface water and sewer team, Stephanie Johnson and her team, who essentially, when we were asked to jump, they said how high and made it happen at a location that wasn't initially set up to go into, and they did it in under 48 hours. So they're awesome. Everyone is awesome. It was a great experience. So thank you. On Monday, the higher education package was released. That's around $447 million, includes a lot of asset preservation. And today, along with a smorgasbord, everything else, the public safety and asset preservation portion of the bill was released. The total bill comes to proposal $2.6 billion. There's a breakdown in front of you of each type of bond, but we're looking at about $2.028 billion in general obligation bonds. So, I came to you back in August to go through what was submitted to the Office of Management and Budget as far as requests for capital investment for the 2020 session. And just to recall, the local government's total request was $1.3 billion. State agency request was $4 billion, giving a total of $5.3 billion. Today, we looked at that breakdown. The projects included amongst local governments in the proposal is $400 million, and state agencies almost $2.2 billion. So those are still a delta, but still a significant investment. Along in August, we did a highlights of ourselves and our Metro partners, so I wanted to mirror that on what was proposed, but today what was included. Again, this is the governor's proposal. There's still a legislative process to be worked out during session. As far as City of Minneapolis projects, the stormwater tunnel is included at the full request of $19 million. At the Park Board, the 26th Avenue connection, it's around, I don't know if you're familiar with the area, but 26th Avenue stops, and then there's an industrial area, and there's no connection to the river. So this would provide a connection along 26th Avenue. The Grand Rounds missing link implementation is included, and then the North Commons regional vision is also included.
I do want to ask you on the City of Minneapolis fulfillment of our priorities. We don't have Upper Harbor Terminal in the governor's capital investment proposal, and so I was looking for some commentary on that, on why and what our thoughts are on that.
Certainly. The Upper Harbor Terminal, the performing arts venue is the city's #1 bonding priority. When the governor released this proposal, he was very clear that this is really a focus on critical infrastructure. and public safety investments, and that is very much reflected in the projects that he included. There are many local projects that will be left up to the legislative process. Last year, when the governor released his bonding proposal, he actually did not include any local projects. So this year, bringing more of a focus on public safety and critical infrastructure, and then leaving other types of projects to the House and the Senate negotiation process.
Excellent. Thank you. I appreciate that explanation. Council Vice Chair Jenkins.
Yeah, I guess I'm just curious, does the 26th Avenue project, is it connected to the Upper Harbor Terminal work at all, or?
Chair Johnson, Council Vice President, it is slightly south of the Upper Harbor Terminal 48-acre development, but the riverfront, the River First vision, that's a critical piece and a critical connection that eventually, as we see the redevelopment of the riverfront, will be a piece of that.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. In the essence of time, we'll move on. Some of very important projects of state agencies that are on our supporting legislative agenda. We wanted to note that the Met Council in the proposal is receiving $55 million for the Bus Rapid Transit Capital Improvement Program, in which the D-line is the top priority of that program. So that is important for Minneapolis residents. Regional Parks and Trails Program for the Met Council, which the Park Board does receive funding from, and the Inflow and Infiltration Grant Program, which is also critical for a lot of our private residence spots in Minneapolis. Minnesota Housing Finance Agency has a proposal of $200 million in housing infrastructure bonds and $60 million towards public housing rehabilitation and general obligation bonds. That would be a historic investment in housing, so we're happy to see that. And then the Department of Employment and Economic Development, South Minneapolis Career Force Location Asset Preservation Phase 3, which is the workforce development spot right there on Chicago and Lake. As far as other Minneapolis locations, the University of Minnesota Twin Cities had their first and third priority as far as capital investments are included. The Minneapolis College MCTC is in the proposal, and then the Capital Assistance Program to the City of Minneapolis transfer station renovation through the Minnesota Pollution and Control Agency is included, and we'll be following up with that in our more detailed brief. And I made a mistake. It's 571,000, not million. Secondly, we just wanted to bring your attention to some non-capital investment, but important pieces and language that was included in the bill. Under the Minnesota Management Budget Office, there is language to allocate $235,000 in cash for MMB to conduct outreach and assistance to nonprofits and institutions that either are run by or serve people of color to educate them and bring them into the capital investment process at the state. So more of an education opportunity. And then there is $500,000 in cash to the Department of Public Safety to do a regional or statewide training facility study. There's been an increase in need for training facilities for public safety, police, fire, and emergency response. And the state, would like to take more of a comprehensive approach into how to evaluate those proposals. So. And as we made an addition to our bonding list, this is timely. So.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So happy to stand for any questions.
Any questions from committee members? Not seeing any.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we have next up on the slide is a list of the meetings that are going to be held over the next couple of weeks. The Senate will be having today in Rochester Senator Senjum's bill about Energy First. It deals a lot with what the Public Utilities Commission can do and cannot do. It's really putting an emphasis on alternative energy sources and other factors to be considered in rates. There will be a hearing on the next week out in Mound, Senator Osmick's committee. We will get a report to you on the hearings and how it could impact some of our programs. There is a hearing next week in Hibbing, next Tuesday, and it is about gun violence. There's going to be gun laws, particularly Senator Latz's bill dealing with so-called red flag, also how selling of guns. There will also be Senator, I think Limmer has bills also on those two topics. There will also be some bills dealing with changes to conceal and carry, and also discussion of a bill that is often known as stand your ground or castle doctrine. It's, I think, effective in Texas and Florida. Those bills, I think there's 6 or 7 bills, will be discussed next week by the committee up in Hibbing, and Senator Dietzig is on that committee, and she will be there. In the House, there will be a meeting on housing and refugee communities next week. That will be Representative Hausman's committee. The election subcommittee will be talking about census and redistricting in Shakopee. Representative Dean is the chair of that committee. He's been on the road. He was in Austin a couple weeks ago. He will be now out in Shakopee trying to get folks concerned and excited about doing the census. On the 27th of January and the 29th will be pretty busy days in the House. There will be a discussion about the harvest report in the Ag committee, concerned about how did the harvest come out this year in terms of not only tonnage or volume, but also in terms of dollars, particularly with the tariffs. Also, there's going to be an interesting discussion about how climate change is going to affect agriculture in our state. And we will watch that hearing because it could have some impact on the city when it comes to pollinators and other things like pesticides. On the 29th, both public safety and there'll be joint committee hearings. The first one in the afternoon will be the future of prison and probation funding. There is concern that maybe probation could be too long, and what is the cost of our prisons, particularly as some prisoners age. There's those other kinds of needs. So Representative Considine will be having a joint committee hearing with 2 committees from the House. Later in the day, there will be a hearing. Representative Mariani and Representative Lesh will be having a hearing with their committees on race and the law. We don't know the exact place yet where it will be, nor do we have an agenda, but within the next week or 2, we'll get that to you. On the 30th, the Joint Subcommittee on Data Practices will meet. Again, their agenda is not yet been published, but it will probably be in the House Senate Committee room. So that's what we know is coming up, and we'll stand for any questions.
Great, thank you for the updates. Any questions from committee members? Not seeing any.
Mr. Chairman, I have one correction, one clarification. When we were talking about the SNAP program, we want to clarify that one of the rules would make it for a person who has a family who has children, and those children are automatically eligible for free or reduced lunch. Under this new rule, that family would have to apply for the program. It wouldn't be automatic. So that could cause some folks not to apply. So we have to make sure that if this rule does go into effect, working with the school district, word to get out that you have to apply.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate the clarification and all the updates. Not seeing any questions, so I'll go ahead and move that we receive and file this presentation. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, the motion carries. Seeing no further business before us, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Yeah, thanks.